Anna Whitmore tore the letter in half before she finished reading it. Her hands were shaking. Her jaw was locked tight. The whole platform was watching her. She could feel every single eye, but she didn't look up. She just tore the paper again, and again, until the pieces were too small to hold any more of his words. Then she opened her fingers and let the wind take every last piece off that platform and out across the Montana plain. She would not cry. Not here. Not where they could see her. If this woman's story already has you feeling something, you are in exactly the right place. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss a single episode. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Now settle in, because what happens next on that platform is going to change everything you think you know about second chances. The station master had watched enough arrivals to know when something had gone wrong before a single word was spoken. He saw it in the way the woman in the gray traveling dress stepped down from the third car, careful, composed, holding her suitcase with both hands like it was the only thing in the world she could trust. He saw it in the way she scanned the platform once, twice, a third time, her eyes moving through the crowd with the particular focus of someone searching for a specific face. He had seen that looks before. He had seen it on mothers waiting for sons who weren't coming back from the war. He had seen it on men waiting for business partners who'd taken their money and vanished east. He had seen it on young women arriving for weddings that never happened. He knew what was coming next. He turned back to his paperwork and let the afternoon do what it was going to do. The woman's name was Anna Whitmore, though nobody at Red Willow Station knew that yet. She was 27 years old, a widow out of Springfield, Missouri, with chestnut hair pinned back under a bonnet that had seen better days and dark eyes that gave very little away unless you knew how to look. She had been traveling for 4 days. She had not slept properly in 3. She had eaten 2 proper meals since Kansas City and spent the rest of the journey watching the landscape change from farmland to prairie to something wilder and harder and more honest than anything she had known back east. She had told herself the journey itself was a sign, that a woman willing to cross that much open country for a future was a woman who deserved one. The advertisement had run in the Springfield Gazette 6 months earlier. She had read it 3 times before she cut it out, and another 12 times before she answered it. Widowed rancher, Red Willow, Montana. Seeking a woman of good character, patient disposition, and willingness to embrace frontier life. 2 sons, age 6. Correspondence welcomed. Serious inquiries only. His name was written at the bottom. Thomas Harding. The letters were neat and careful, which told her something about him before a single word of his reply arrived. They had written back and forth for 4 months. His letters were not flowery or excessive. He did not promise her the world. He told her about the ranch, about the boys, about the way winters came hard out of the north, and how a person had to be made of something solid to see it through. He told her the twins' names, Jacob and James, and that Jacob talked enough for both of them, and James still slept with a worn-out stuffed bear that had belonged to their mother. That detail had broken something open in Anna's chest that she hadn't realized was sealed shut. She had written back and told him about her own husband Daniel, gone 2 years from fever, and how she had spent those 2 years learning that grief didn't disappear. It just changed shape. She told him she was not looking to forget anything. She was looking to build something. His next letter had arrived within the week. I believe we understand each other, he had written. Come to Red Willow. I will be at the station when your train arrives. She had counted the days. Now she stood on the platform of Red Willow Station on a Tuesday afternoon in July of 1884, and Thomas Harding was not there. She checked every face again. The platform was not large. A handful of travelers collecting bags, a few locals meeting family, 2 cowboys leaning against the far wall watching the street. No man standing alone. No man holding his hat with the particular nervousness of someone waiting on a woman he'd only ever known through letters. She set her suitcase down carefully and stood very still. That was when the boy appeared. Couldn't have been more than 16, working for the station by the look of his vest and the way he moved through the crowd like he had somewhere specific to be. He stopped in front of her with a folded envelope held out at arm's length, the way people held things they didn't want to be responsible for. "You Anna Whitmore," he said. "I am," she said. He pushed the envelope toward her. "Man asked me to give you this. Said I'd know you by the gray dress and the single bag." She took the envelope. The boy was already moving away before she broke the seal. The letter inside was short, less than half a page. Thomas Harding's careful handwriting, the same letters she had been reading for months. But the words were wrong, all wrong, and she read them twice because the first time her brain refused to accept them. "Miss Whitmore, I owe you an apology. I do not know how to properly make. In the week since my last, circumstances have changed. I have entered into an arrangement with a woman here in the county, someone known to my family and to my boys. I believe this is the better course for my sons. I am sorry for the expense and difficulty of your journey. I have enclosed the train fare for your return. I wish you well. T. Harding." Folded inside the letter was a banknote. Anna stood with the letter in one hand and the money in the other, and for approximately 4 seconds she felt absolutely nothing. Then something rose up from somewhere below her ribs. Not grief. Not yet. But something older and more dangerous than grief. Something that had been building for 2 years and 4 months of surviving and starting over and telling herself that patience was not the same thing as weakness. She tore the letter in half. She tore it again. She kept tearing until the pieces were too small to tear anymore. And then she opened her hand and let the July wind take every fragment off the edge of the platform and scatter them out across the tracks and the dry Montana grass beyond. She held the banknote a moment longer. Then she turned to find the station master, who had apparently been watching the whole thing from behind his window because he met her eyes immediately and had the decency to look uncomfortable about it. She walked to his window and slid the banknote through the gap at the bottom. "There's a Thomas Harding in this county," she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. "When someone sees him next, they can return this to him. I won't be needing it." The station master looked at the money. He looked at her. "Miss, the next eastbound train isn't until Thursday morning." "That's fine," Anna said. "I'm not looking for the eastbound train." She picked up her suitcase and walked off the platform. She had no plan. She had almost no money, what she'd saved herself, which wasn't much after the journey. She had no family within 500 miles, no acquaintance in this town, no reference, no letter of introduction. Nothing except the clothes on her back and the contents of one suitcase, and the absolute iron-boned refusal to give Thomas Harding the satisfaction of watching her disappear quietly. She had not come this far to disappear quietly. Red Willow was not a large town. She could see that much from the main street. A general store, a feed merchant, a barber. 2 saloons placed at a respectful distance from a small white church, a hotel that looked clean enough, a doctor's office, a land registry building with peeling paint, a livery stable at the far end. Homes spreading out behind the main row of businesses, modest and frontier practical, with gardens that fought the dry summer heat and mostly lost. People noticed her. She noticed them noticing. In a town this size, a woman arriving alone with a suitcase was not invisible, and a woman who had just been left standing at the station by a man who'd advertised for a wife was less invisible still. Word traveled fast in places where there wasn't enough news to slow it down. She could see it happening in real time. The glances, the whispered exchanges, the way 2 women near the dry goods store turned slightly toward each other when they saw her coming. She kept her chin level and her stride steady and walked to the hotel. The man behind the desk was heavy-set mid-50s, with the kind of face that had made a lifetime's worth of small calculations about which customers were worth the trouble. "I need a room," Anna said. "For at least a week, possibly longer. I can pay the first 3 nights now." The man looked at her suitcase. He looked at her traveling dress, which was good quality, but visibly worn from 4 days on the train. He looked at her face, and whatever he was reading there was apparently not the right thing for business. "I'm sorry, miss," he said. "We're full up." Anna looked around the empty lobby. She looked at the key rack behind him, where at least a dozen hooks held their keys undisturbed. "Full up," she repeated. "Yes, ma'am." She picked up her suitcase and walked back out into the afternoon sun. She tried the boarding house 2 streets over. A widow ran at a stout woman with sharp eyes and a son who kept watching from the hallway. "I don't take in single women traveling alone," the woman said, not unkindly but firmly. "Nothing personal. It's just my policy." "What is your concern exactly?" Anna asked, because she was past the point of accepting things without asking. The woman hesitated. "It's not my concern about you specifically," she said. "It's the impression it gives. A woman in your situation." "What situation is that, ma'am?" Another hesitation. "Arriving without a party, without a family. A single woman unattached." "I am a widow," Anna said. "Same as you from the look of it. And I have done nothing improper. The man I came here to meet failed to appear. That is his failure, not mine." The woman's expression shifted something between sympathy and something harder to name. "I'm sorry," she said. "I truly am. But I can't help you." The door closed. Anna stood on the porch of the boarding house and looked at the street and breathed. Slowly, deliberately. The way she had learned to breathe in the months after Daniel died, when breathing itself had required a conscious decision. She was not going to cry. She was absolutely not going to stand on a porch in a strange town and cry where people could see her. She sat down on the porch steps instead, set her suitcase beside her, and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of pure private fury at Thomas Harding and his careful handwriting and his convenient change of circumstance at the hotel man and his empty key hooks at the boarding house. Woman and her policies at herself, for the small foolish part of her that had believed a newspaper advertisement could be the beginning of something real. 60 seconds. Then she stopped. She needed work. She needed a roof. Those were the two actual problems, and both of them had solutions that did not require Thomas Harding or anyone else's charity. She was thinking through the list of establishments on the main street, considering which one might need help and be willing to pay a fair wage for it when the wagon pulled up at the end of the street. She didn't pay particular attention to it at first. Wagons were everywhere. But this one stopped, and the man driving it sat for a moment looking at her with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who was deciding something. How was a large man, not in the heavy way of someone who had simply grown large, but in the way of someone who had worked hard in open country for a long time and been shaped by it. Somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark hair under a weathered hat that he wore with the natural ease of a man who had never thought about whether he looked good in it. A jaw that currently held 3 or 4 days of unshaved stubble, not from carelessness, but from the look of a man who shaved when he had time for it and didn't apologize when he didn't. He climbed down from the wagon with the economical movement of someone who had climbed down from wagons 10,000 times and never wasted energy on the performance of it. He walked toward her. Anna watched him come without adjusting her posture or her expression. She was sitting on someone else's porch steps with a suitcase beside her, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. He stopped a respectful distance away and took off his hat. "You're the woman from the station," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Anna said. "Thomas Harding sent you a letter." "He did." "I heard about it." He turned the hat in his hands once slowly, the way men did when they were looking for the right words. "I'm sorry. He should have sent word sooner. Should have been man enough to meet you himself and say it to your face." "He should have," Anna agreed. "But he didn't. And I've stopped spending my time on things people should have done." Something shifted in the man's expression. A small adjustment, barely visible, like something he hadn't expected and found he respected. "My name's Ethan Callahan," he said. "I run the Double C Ranch about 4 miles north." "Anna Whitmore," she said. He nodded. "I know you've already been to the hotel, and I imagine the boarding house didn't work out." Anna looked at him steadily. "Word does travel fast. It does." He held her gaze without apology. "I'm not here to make you an offer you'd find insulting, Miss Whitmore. I'm not. I want to be clear about that. I'm here because I have a practical problem, and you appear to be a capable woman who has just found herself without a practical solution, and it seemed like both those things might be worth mentioning in the same conversation." Anna said nothing. She waited. Ethan turned the hat one more time. "I have twin boys," he said. 6 years old, Noah and Samuel. Their mother died when they were 3. I have been managing the household and the ranch mostly alone since then, with some help from my mother, who is 64 years old and wearing herself down to nothing, trying to keep up with 2 6-year-olds and a working ranch. I need someone patient, someone steady, someone who can take over the household and help with the boys so my mother can rest, and I can focus on keeping the cattle alive through August. He paused. I'm not talking about marriage, he said clearly and directly. I'm talking about honest work, a fair wage, room and board included, a place to be while you figure out your next step. And I will tell you plainly, my boys need someone who isn't going to look at them like they're a burden, and my mother needs someone who isn't going to look at her like she's in the way. If that's not something you can do honestly, I'd rather know now. Anna looked at him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? She said. He met her eyes. Because you sat on that porch and didn't cry, he said. And because you gave his money back. And because I've got 2 boys at home who have been praying every night for 3 years for someone patient to walk through our door, and I've been telling them to keep praying. He paused. I'm not saying you're the answer to their prayers, Miss Whitmore. I'm not putting that on you. I'm just saying I stopped passing by capable women sitting alone on porch steps. About the same time I started listening to what my boys asked for at night. Anna stood up. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with the careful, measuring attention she had learned to use in the 2 years since she'd had to start making every decision for herself. I have conditions, she said. I'd expect so, Ethan said. I won't be made to feel like a charity case. I work for the wage you pay me, same as anyone else. Understood. If I decide to leave, I leave with proper notice and without argument. Agreed. And if I have a problem with the way things are run, I'll say so directly. I won't pretend things are fine when they aren't. Ethan looked at her with something that might on a different man's face have been the beginning of a smile. Miss Whitmore, he said. That might be the most welcome thing anyone said to me in about 4 years. He picked up her suitcase before she could object. She let him carry it to the wagon, not because she couldn't carry it herself, but because she was choosing to let it be a gesture rather than a contest. The drive out to the Callahan Ranch took just under 40 minutes along a rutted road that cut north through dry summer grass. Ethan didn't talk much. He answered questions when she asked them about the layout of the ranch, about the boys' habits, about what the household needed most urgently. He didn't fill the silence with unnecessary reassurance or charm, which she found she appreciated more than she would have expected. The boys know you're coming, she asked at one point. No, he said. I didn't want to promise them something before I knew if you'd agree. She thought about that. That was considerate. I've broken enough promises to those boys that I don't make them until I'm sure I can keep them, he said, and the plainness of it, the absence of self-pity in the way he said it, told her more about Ethan Callahan than anything else he'd said since he took off his hat. The ranch house came into view around a long curve in the road, and Anna looked at it carefully. It was a working ranch, she could see that immediately. Not prosperous, but not broken. The kind of place that was held together by constant effort and would fall apart the moment that effort stopped. The main house was solid wood-framed 2 stories with a covered porch that ran the length of the front, and a kitchen garden along the south side that was fighting the heat and partly winning. Outbuildings spread to the east, a barn, a tool shed, a smaller structure that looked like a bunkhouse. Cattle in the distance, a dozen or more visible from the road. A woman came out onto the porch before the wagon stopped. She was perhaps 65, not tall, with white hair pulled back under a practical bonnet, and the kind of face that had been pretty once, and was now something better than pretty, settled and certain, and entirely comfortable with itself. She watched the wagon pull up with the calm attention of someone who had been expecting this, or something like it, without knowing exactly what shape it would take. Mama, Ethan said, climbing down. This is Anna Whitmore. She'll be staying with us a while and helping with the household and the boys. The woman looked at Anna with the direct, unhurried assessment of someone who had earned the right to look at people directly and assess them without apology. Margaret Callahan, she said. She did not come down from the porch. You were the one at the station today. Yes, ma'am, Anna said. Thomas Harding is a fool, Margaret said. Yes, ma'am, Anna said. He is. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then something in her face settled into a different kind of decision. "Can you cook?" she said. "Well enough," Anna said. "Can you manage boys who have too much energy and not enough supervision?" "I expect so." "Can you keep your head when things go sideways, which they do regularly around here?" "I've had practice," Anna said. Margaret looked at her for one more long beat. Then she stepped back from the porch door and held it open. "Come inside," she said. "I'll put coffee on, and you can tell me what you actually need to know about those boys before they come tearing in here from the pasture and make it impossible to have a sensible conversation." Anna carried her own suitcase up the porch steps past Margaret and through the door into the cool, dim interior of the Callahan house, which smelled like coffee and wood and dried herbs hanging from the kitchen ceiling, and the particular settled scent of a house that had been a home for a long time. She stood in the kitchen doorway and let herself feel it for a moment. She didn't know yet what this place was going to be. She didn't know if it would work or how long she would stay, or whether Ethan Callahan was as straightforward as he seemed, or whether there was something underneath the plain-spoken practicality that she hadn't seen yet. She knew she was tired. She knew she was in a stranger's house. She knew the whole afternoon had been one long exercise in absorbing one blow after another without letting any of them knock her down. But the kitchen was cool, and there was coffee coming, and somewhere outside in the direction of the pasture she could hear two voices high and bright and carrying the boundless, unsuppressed energy of 6-year-olds who had no idea yet what was waiting for them when they came home. And something about those voices, something about the particular pitch and frequency of children who were simply alive and curious and full of the future, settled into Anna Whitmore's chest like the first real breath she had taken since she stepped off that train. She set her suitcase down by the door. She walked to the kitchen table. She sat down. "Tell me about the boys," she said to Margaret Callahan. "Tell me everything." Margaret set 2 cups on the table and looked at her with something that had moved a long way from the careful assessment of 5 minutes ago. "Noah talks first," Margaret said, settling into the chair across from her. "Always has. He'll ask you 12 questions before you've finished answering the first one. Don't let it overwhelm you. He's not being difficult. He's just genuinely interested in everything, which is exhausting, but it ain't a flaw." "And Samuel?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, and the silence had a texture to it, the particular weight of something that mattered. "Samuel watches," she said. "He's been watching people since he was old enough to understand that someone important wasn't coming back. He's going to watch you for a good long while before he decides anything about you." "That's all right," Anna said. "I can be patient." "You'll need to be," Margaret said. "He's been patient with his grief for 3 years. He deserves somebody who'll be patient back." They were still at the table when the back door flew open 20 minutes later with the particular violence of a door opened by someone who had been running and hadn't quite slowed down in time. 2 boys tumbled into the kitchen, one immediately ahead of the other. Dark-haired, sunburned, wearing nearly identical expressions of pure physical aliveness. And then both of them stopped dead when they saw Anna sitting at their kitchen table. The first boy, Noah, she already knew, stared at her with enormous dark eyes, and then looked immediately at his grandmother. "Grandma, who's that?" "This is Miss Whitmore," Margaret said. "She's going to be staying with us and helping out around the house." Noah swung his gaze back to Anna with the kind of evaluating attention that 6-year-olds brought to everything which was complete and without social filter. "Where did you come from?" "Missouri," Anna said. "That's far," he said, as though this was a significant data point. "It is," she agreed. "Did you come on the train?" "I did." "I've never been on a train," he said. He crossed to the table and sat down across from her with the decisive confidence of someone who had decided this was interesting and intended to pursue it. "What's it like?" "Long," Anna said, "and loud, and the seats get uncomfortable after the second day." "How many days were you on it?" "4. Noah absorbed this. "Samuel," he said without looking away from Anna, "come over here." The second boy had not moved from the doorway. He was watching Anna with the careful measuring eyes that Margaret had described, not unfriendly, but not open either. The eyes of a child who had learned to look before he trusted. Anna looked back at him steadily, and without any of the exaggerated warmth that adults sometimes offered children they were trying too hard to impress. She just looked at him, calmly, without pushing. Samuel looked back. After a moment, he crossed the kitchen, not to the table, but to stand beside his grandmother's chair, which Anna understood was exactly what it appeared to be, and respected accordingly. "Hi," he said very quietly. "Hi," Anna said. "I'm Anna." He didn't respond immediately. Then, "Are you going to stay?" She thought about saying, "I hope so," or "We'll see," the softened answers that didn't commit to anything. She thought about it and decided against it. "For now," she said honestly. "Long enough to see if I can be useful." He turned this over, looked at her, turned it over again. Then he sat down in his grandmother's chair, not beside Anna, not across from her, but adjacent at the corner of the table, and looked at the coffee cups and at his hands, and then back at Anna, with something in his expression that was still guarded but had shifted fractionally in some direction she couldn't quite name. "Okay," he said. It was not a welcome. It was not an acceptance. It was not a beginning. But it was a door left slightly open, and Anna Whitmore, who had come a long way and lost a great deal and was still sitting at this table, understood better than most people what a slightly open door was worth. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Outside, the July sun was dropping toward the western hills, and the cattle in the pasture were settling for the evening. And somewhere in the house, Ethan Callahan was doing whatever he did at the end of a ranch day, and Margaret was already moving toward the stove to start something for supper, and two 6-year-olds were in various stages of deciding what to make of the woman who had appeared at their kitchen table. Anna didn't try to fill the silence. She simply stayed in it. That she had learned was sometimes the most important thing a person could do. Noah asked her 14 more questions before supper was on the table. Samuel didn't ask any. But 3 times during the meal, Anna caught him watching her with those careful, measuring eyes, and 3 times when he saw that she'd noticed he didn't look away. He just held her gaze for a moment, steady and serious, like a small person deciding something that mattered. She let him decide. Whatever he decided, she would still be here in the morning, and the morning after that. That was what she had left. Not promises, not plans, not a husband or a home, or any of the things she had traveled 400 miles believing she was going toward. Just the plain, quiet willingness to still be here. She was starting to think it might be enough. She was starting to think it might be the most important thing there was. The morning after Anna Whitmore arrived at the Callahan Ranch, she was awake before anyone else. Not because she couldn't sleep, though the bed in the small room off the kitchen was unfamiliar, and the sounds of the ranch at night were different from anything she'd known in Missouri. She was awake because she had decided somewhere in the thin hours before dawn that the best thing she could do was be useful before anyone had to ask her to be. She found the kitchen by memory. 3 steps from her door. Turn left. Mind the low beam, and had the stove lit and water heating before the first light started coming through the east window. She found the coffee tin, the flour, the salt pork hanging in the larder. She found a cast iron skillet that had been used 10,000 times and was better for every one of them. She found her way around someone else's kitchen, the way she'd found her way around every difficult situation in the last 2 years, quietly, carefully, without making a fuss about it. Margaret Callahan appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, fully dressed, white hair already pinned back, and stopped when she saw the coffee pot on the stove and the biscuits coming together on the workboard. She stood there for a moment without saying anything. "I hope I haven't overstepped," Anna said without turning around. "I wasn't sure what the morning routine was. I can leave it for you if you'd rather." "Sit down," Margaret said. Anna turned. "Ma'am." "Sit down," Margaret said again more firmly. "I will pour you a cup of coffee, and you will drink it sitting down, like a person who slept on a train for 4 days, and then had the worst Tuesday of her life, and you will let me finish the biscuits." Anna looked at her. "I'm capable of—" "I know you're capable," Margaret said. "That is not the point I am making. Something about the certainty." In the old woman's voice cut right through Anna's defenses, the careful, efficient armor she had been wearing since she stepped off that train and found something underneath that was simply tired. She sat down. Margaret poured the coffee and set it in front of her without ceremony, then moved to the workboard and took over the biscuits with the practiced ease of someone who had made them 10,000 times in this kitchen. "You don't have to earn your place here by exhausting yourself," Margaret said, her hands moving steadily. "Ethan didn't bring you here to run you into the ground. He brought you here because this household needs help, and there's a difference." "I know that," Anna said. "Do you?" Margaret glanced at her sideways. "Because from where I'm standing it looks like a woman who's been told so many times that she's only worth what she can do, that she's forgotten there's a difference between working hard and working scared." Anna wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and didn't answer immediately. "I'm not scared," she said finally. "Maybe not," Margaret said. "But you got up 2 hours before sunrise to cook for people who haven't asked you for anything yet. That tells me something." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happened between two women who had each spent a long time being the person who kept things running and who recognized that quality in each other without needing to name it. "The boys will be up within the hour," Margaret said. "Noah will come through that door like a small tornado. Samuel will come through it like he's checking to make sure the world is still the same as he left it. He does that every morning since his mother died." Margaret set the biscuits in the pan with the careful placement of long habit. "He checks the kitchen first, then the front room. Then he goes to the window that faces the barn to make sure his father's horse is still in the corral." She paused. "He did it 3 times a day for the first 6 months. We're down to once now. Progress." Anna felt something move through her chest, not quite pain, but something adjacent to it. The particular ache of recognizing grief in a shape you'd almost forgotten you knew. "How long has it been?" she asked. "Since their mother. 3 years this past spring," Margaret said. "Clara, she was a good woman. Too young and too good, which is how it always seems to go." She slid the pan toward the back of the stove. "Ethan didn't talk for about 2 weeks after. Just worked. Morning to night every day until I told him if he didn't sleep, I was going to drag him inside myself, and I meant it." "And the boys. Boys that age don't have words for it yet," Margaret said quietly. "They have behavior for it. Noah started talking more, filling the quiet, I think, because the quiet was where she used to be. Samuel started watching, making sure everyone he loved was still accounted for." She looked at Anna directly. "Which is why what you said to him last night mattered." Anna looked up. "What I said?" "You told him the truth," Margaret said. "You said for now long enough to see if I can be useful. You didn't promise him something you couldn't keep. He's had enough of those." Anna thought about the small boy's eyes across the supper table, steady and measuring and carrying something much heavier than 6 years should reasonably hold. "He's going to watch me for a long time before he trusts me," she said. "Yes," Margaret agreed. "And that is exactly correct, and you are not to try to rush it, or work around it, or charm your way past it. You let him watch. You keep showing up. That's all he needs from you." "That I can do," Anna said. The back door opened, like it had been hit by something, and Noah Callahan came through it at a full run, stopped 4 feet into the kitchen when he registered that something was different. Processed the fact of Anna sitting at the table with the speed of a child's brain processing new information, and immediately crossed to sit across from her. "You're still here," he said. "I told you I would be," Anna said. He considered this with great seriousness. "Most people say things," he said, "and then they don't do them." "That's been my experience too," Anna said. "I try not to be one of those people." Noah looked at her for a moment with those enormous dark eyes. Then he apparently decided this was satisfactory, because he turned to his grandmother and said, "Grandma, are those biscuits? Can I have 4? "You can have 2, Margaret said, "and you can say good morning before you start making demands like a small emperor." "Good morning," Noah said immediately without any apparent embarrassment. He looked back at Anna. "Do you know how to fish?" "I do," Anna said. His face lit up. "There's a creek north of the east pasture. Pa says the fish in it are as big as my arm, but I think he might be exaggerating. Do you think he's exaggerating?" "I think fathers sometimes do," Anna said seriously. But I also think creeks tend to have more fish than people expect. We'd have to go see for ourselves." Noah looked at her like she had said something extraordinary. "Pa never has time to go see for ourselves," he said. "He says he'll take us, but then there's always something with the cattle or the fence." "Well," Anna said carefully, "your father has a great deal to manage, but maybe on a day when the work allows it, we could find out about those fish ourselves, the three of us." Noah absorbed this. Something shifted in his expression, not quite hope, because hope in children was a more complicated thing than it looked, especially in children who had learned to be careful with it. But something in the direction of it. Samuel appeared in the doorway behind his brother, and Anna watched without appearing to watch as his eyes moved through the kitchen stove table. Grandmother Anna, the quiet inventory of a child, making sure the world had held through the night. His gaze settled on Anna last, and stayed there for a moment before he came inside and sat in the chair beside his grandmother. "Good morning," Anna said to him directly. "Morning," he said. He picked up a spoon and turned it in his hands, not eating yet, not talking. Just present in the particular way that Samuel seemed to be present fully watchfully, with the whole of himself held slightly in reserve. Ethan came through this back door 20 minutes into breakfast, bringing the smell of early morning ranch work with him, and stopped when he saw the biscuits on the table and the coffee already poured and both his boys eating without having been chased down. He looked at Anna. "You were up early," he said. "I was," she said. He seemed to be deciding whether to say something more about that. He decided not to. He poured his own coffee and sat at the head of the table and asked Noah something about the cattle trough in the east pasture, and breakfast continued around the table with the particular organized chaos of a household with children in it. And Anna sat in the middle of it and felt for the first time since she stepped off that train something that was not grief or anger or calculation. She felt distantly and carefully, and without making anything of it, like she might be somewhere she could stay. That feeling would be tested before the week was out. The first challenge came from the town, which was not surprising, because small towns ran on information, and the information they had about Anna Whitmore was incomplete and therefore available to be filled in with speculation, which people were always eager to provide. It was Ethan who told her 4 days after her arrival that there was talk. He told her directly. The way she was already coming to understand was his way. No softening, no elaborate preamble, just the fact of the thing, and then space for her to respond to it. "People are saying you're staying at the ranch because you have nowhere else to go," he said. They were on the porch after supper, the boys inside with Margaret, the evening cooling towards something bearable after the brutal July heat. "They're saying it puts you in a difficult position. That a woman in your situation—" "My situation," Anna repeated. "Their words," Ethan said. "Not mine." "What is their concern exactly?" I was quiet for a moment. "They think it looks improper. A single woman living at a widower's ranch. They think it suggests something that—" "That isn't happening," Anna said flatly. "I know that," he said. "I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's being said." Anna looked out at the darkening sky and breathed through the familiar rise of anger that came with the familiar shape of this particular injustice. The way women's circumstances were always interpreted as evidence of their character. The way being alone was treated as something to explain and apologize for. "I am working for a fair wage," she said. "I am helping care for 2 children and an elderly woman. That is what is happening. The people of this town can interpret it however they like." "They will," Ethan said. "I want to make sure you're prepared for that." "Mr. Callahan," she said, turning to look at him, "I was publicly rejected at your train station and then turned away from every establishment in this town in the span of 2 hours. I believe I have already met the people of Red Willow on their own terms. I am not particularly intimidated by their opinions." He looked at her for a moment with that quality he had of looking at things directly and without performance. "Fair enough," he said. "But I appreciate you telling me," she added, because he had, and that mattered. He nodded once, and they sat in the quiet for a while not speaking, which was something she had noticed about Ethan Callahan. He had no need to fill silence, which was rarer in people than it should be. It was Samuel who gave her the first real measure of trust, and he did it so quietly that she almost missed it. It was 9 days after her arrival. She had settled into the household rhythm, mornings in the kitchen, afternoons with the boys, or helping Margaret with the mending and the preserving evenings, when she sometimes helped Noah with his reading, or sat on the porch when the heat allowed it. She was learning the ranch's language, which boards on the porch squeaked how the kitchen stove ran hot on the left side, that Noah needed to be redirected rather than corrected, or he dug his heels in. That Margaret's hip bothered her on cold mornings, though she would not admit it. She was learning Samuel in smaller, slower increments. He watched her. She let him watch. She talked to him the same way she talked to Noah, without adjustment, without the particular brightness people sometimes used with children who seemed sad, without any indication that she found his watchfulness difficult or strange. She simply was what she was consistently every day, and let him make of it what he would. On the 9th day, she was mending a shirt at the kitchen table in the afternoon when Samuel came in from outside, sat down across from her without a word, and pushed something across the table toward her. It was a smooth cretonne, gray-brown, with a faint stripe of white quartz running through the middle. She looked at it. She looked at him. "I found it," he said. "By the creek. The white part goes all the way through." She picked it up and held it toward the window light, turning it so the quartz stripe caught the sun. "It does," she said. "All the way through. That's unusual." "I thought so," he said. He was watching her hands with the stone. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. She set it on the table beside her work, not in her pocket, not to one side, right there where she was working, where it would be visible. He looked at it there. He looked at her. Then he got up and went back outside, and she heard the screen door close with its particular sound, and she sat very still for a moment with her mending in her hands, and the stone on the table beside her, and something building behind her eyes that she refused to let go any further than that. She would keep that stone for the rest of her life, but she didn't know that yet. Right now, she just knew that a 6-year-old boy who watched and waited and checked the kitchen every morning to make sure everyone was still there had decided she was worth giving something to, and that was enough. That was more than enough. The twist that changed everything came 11 days after her arrival on a Wednesday afternoon, when Anna was alone in the kitchen making preserves, and the front door of the house opened without a knock. She heard the footsteps cross the front room. Deliberate, confident, the footsteps of someone who walked into places like they owned them, and then Thomas Harding appeared in the kitchen doorway. She recognized him from the description Margaret had given her, not from any photograph. Tall, well-dressed by frontier standards, with the handsome, easy face of a man who had gotten what he wanted often enough to expect it. He was perhaps 40. He held his hat in his hand the way men held hats when they wanted to appear respectful without actually committing to respect. He looked at her standing at the kitchen stove with a surprise he covered quickly. "Miss Whitmore," he said. She set down the ladle she was holding, carefully, without hurry. "Mr. Harding," she said. He came 2 steps into the kitchen. "I heard you were here. I didn't quite believe it at first." He looked around the kitchen at the evidence of her settled presence, the preserves, the organized shelves, the way the household had visibly been cared for. "You've been here, what, a week?" 11 days, she said. "Right." He turned his hat in his hands. "I came because I wanted to talk to you. I think I owe you that." "You owe me a great deal," she said pleasantly, "but I'll hear what you came to say." He looked at her with something that was recalculating its approach. "I made a mistake," he said. "The arrangement I entered into here, it isn't working. The woman it's not what I hoped it would be. And I've been thinking about our correspondence, about what you wrote about the kind of woman you seem to be." "Seem to be," Anna said. He paused. He corrected. "What I know you to be." "Mr. Harding," she said, "you know nothing about what I am. You read my letters. My letters were honest, but they were letters. You don't know me." "I'd like to," he said. And there it was, the pivot, the repositioning, the thing she had already heard coming from 3 sentences back. "I'd like to start again. The situation could be corrected. I could correct it with the other woman," Anna said. "The one from this county, the one your family knows." He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "As I said, it isn't working out," she finished for him. "Yes, I heard you the first time." She picked up the ladle again. "Mr. Harding, I am going to tell you something clearly, because I think you are a man accustomed to being understood without things being stated plainly, and I don't intend to give you that advantage. I traveled 400 miles because you asked me to. I trusted months of correspondence because you asked me to. I prepared myself to build a life in a place I had never seen, because you asked me to, and then you sent me a letter with a banknote in it and a 16-year-old boy to deliver it at the station, because you did not have the courage to come yourself. He opened his mouth. She continued, I am not an arrangement that can be reopened because your preferred arrangement fell through. I am not a second option. I am not something you put aside until it became convenient again. She looked at him with the full, steady weight of everything she had absorbed in the last 11 days. The porch steps, and the empty key rack, and Samuel's stone and Noah's questions, and Margaret's coffee, and Ethan's plain, direct, unvarnished respect. You had the chances to be the kind of man worth crossing 400 miles for. You chose not to be that man. I cannot help you with that decision now. Thomas Harding stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and said nothing for a long moment. The Callahan Ranch is not where I expected to find you, he said finally. No, she agreed. I imagine not. People are going to talk. They already are, she said. I find I don't care much. He looked at her for one more moment, the long, recalculating look of a man deciding whether to push harder or accept that the door was closed, and apparently arrived at the correct conclusion because he put his hat back on his head. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, he said. For the letter. For the boy delivering it. For all of it. I believe you, she said. That doesn't change anything, but I believe you. He nodded once and turned, and his footsteps crossed back through the front room, and the door closed behind him. Anna stood at the stove and breathed. In, out, slow. She didn't hear Ethan come in from the barn. She didn't hear him cross the kitchen floor. She only knew he was there when he stopped beside her and stood quietly long enough that she knew he had heard at least part of it. How long were you standing there, she said. Long enough, he said. She kept her eyes on the preserves. I handled it. I know you did, he said. I wasn't going to interfere. A pause. I wanted to, but I knew you didn't need me to. She turned and looked at him then, because something in his voice had a quality she hadn't heard in it before, something that was not quite his usual plain-spoken directness, something that had been careful with itself until just now. Mr. Callahan, she said. Ethan, he said. I think we're past Mr. She held his gaze. Ethan, I need you to understand something. All right. I am here because the work is real, and the wage is fair, and your sons need someone consistent, and your mother needs rest, she said. That is why I am here, and I need that to stay clear, for the sake of the boys, for the sake of Margaret, and for the sake of I need it to stay clear. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him choosing his words with the same care she was choosing hers. I understand, he said. Good, she said. He moved toward the door, stopped. Anna, he said. She had told him the night before that Anna was fine. He had been using it with the same careful deliberateness with which he did everything. She waited. What he said, Ethan said without turning around. About not being where he expected to find you. He was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you're here. For the reasons you said. All the reasons you said. I want you to know that. She looked at his back. At the set of his shoulders. At the hat he still wore inside the house sometimes when he'd just come in from outside and hadn't quite arrived yet. I know, she said. He walked out. She turned back to the stove. Her hands were not quite steady. She made them steady. The preserves needed attention, and the afternoon was still full, and there was supper to think about, and in approximately 2 hours, Noah would come through that door like a small storm, and Samuel would come through it checking that everyone was still there, and she was going to be standing in this kitchen when they did. That was what she had decided. That was what she was going to do. What she had not decided. What she was carefully not deciding yet was what to make of the fact that when Ethan Callahan's footsteps crossed the kitchen floor and stopped beside her, something in her chest had gone very quiet in the particular way that things went quiet when they were paying close attention. She had noticed it. She was not doing anything about it. She was simply continuing to show up. That was enough for now. That was, she told herself firmly, exactly enough. The sun went down on the Callahan ranch the same as always, long and slow and red through the dust, and Anna Whitmore was still there when it did. 3 weeks after Anna Whitmore arrived at the Callahan ranch, Samuel stopped checking the window that faced the barn every morning. She noticed before anyone else did. She was in the kitchen when it happened, or rather when it didn't happen, and she stood very still for a moment with the coffee pot in her hand and watched the small boy come through the kitchen door. Look at the table, look at her, and simply sit down, without completing his usual circuit of the room. She didn't say anything about it. She poured his milk and set it in front of him and asked him whether he wanted 1 egg or 2 the same as every morning. 2, he said. 2 it is, she said. That was all. But when she turned back to the stove, she let herself feel it, just for a moment, just in the privacy of her own chest. The particular weight of what it meant that a 6-year-old boy who had been checking that window every single morning for 3 years had finally, on this ordinary Tuesday, simply trusted that the world would hold without him watching it. Margaret noticed 2 days later. He stopped, she said quietly to Anna, when the boys were outside and Ethan was in the far pasture. I know, Anna said. Do you understand what that means? I think so, Anna said. Margaret looked at her with the direct, unhurried eyes that had assessed her on that first afternoon and found her acceptable. It means you're the first person in 3 years he's decided to trust with the watching, she said. He's let you carry some of it. Anna kept her hands busy with the bread dough and didn't answer because there wasn't an answer that didn't risk unraveling something she was keeping carefully held together. Don't you go breaking that boy's trust, Margaret said. Not unkindly. Absolutely seriously. I don't intend to, Anna said. Intentions are one thing, Margaret said. Staying is another. Anna pressed the heels of her hands into the dough and said nothing, because Margaret was right, and they both knew it, and there was nothing to add to that. The town had not forgotten her. She felt this every time she went in with Margaret for supplies the particular way. Conversations adjusted when she walked into a store. The glances that followed her down the street. The careful social geometry of women who knew each other stepping slightly together as she passed. Nothing overt. Nothing she could point to directly. Just the constant low pressure of being watched and judged by people who had decided her story before she'd had a chance to tell it. It was Ruth Hensley who finally said it to her face. Ruth Hensley was the wife of the county land agent, a broad-shouldered woman of about 50, with the particular authority of someone who had been the person other people looked to for social orientation for so long that she'd forgotten it was a role and not a fact of nature. She found Anna at the dry goods counter on a Thursday morning, Margaret having gone to the post office, and she placed herself at Anna's elbow with the deliberateness of someone who had been waiting for this moment. Miss Whitmore, she said. Mrs. Hensley, Anna said. She had learned the names quickly. I'll be direct with you, Ruth said, which was always a warning sign. People in this town care about the Callahan family. Ethan Callahan is a good man. Those boys have already lost one woman. Anna set down the spool of thread she was examining. They have, she said carefully. A woman who arrived the way you did. Ruth said, without family, without a proper introduction, without a husband, Anna said. That is what you mean. Ruth's expression tightened slightly. Without the kind of established position that would make your presence at that ranch above reproach. People are concerned. If you stay much longer, it becomes what Mrs. Hensley. A problem, Ruth said flatly. For Ethan, for those boys. People will talk about what kind of woman makes herself comfortable in a widower's home. Anna looked at her. She took a slow breath. She thought about the 16 options available to her in this moment, and she chose the one that was truest. Mrs. Hensley, she said, I have worked every day since I arrived at that ranch. I have cooked and cleaned and mended and cared for 2 children who needed steady care and an elderly woman who needed rest. I have accepted a fair and given fair work in return. I have done nothing improper, nothing dishonest, and nothing that any person in this town could point to with justification. She picked the thread back up. The concern you are describing is not about those boys. It is about whether a woman who arrived here alone can be trusted to know her own place. And I am afraid I cannot help you with that concern, because I have decided my own place, and it is not determined by what this town finds convenient." Ruth Hensley stared at her. Anna put the thread on the counter and looked at the storekeeper for the price. Ruth left without another word. Anna's hands were perfectly steady on the counter. She made sure of it. Margaret appeared in the doorway of the store. 30 seconds later, and looked at Anna, and then at the space where Ruth Hensley had been. "What did she say to you?" Margaret said. "She expressed concern for the family," Anna said. Margaret made a sound that communicated exactly what she thought of that. "Ruth Hensley hasn't expressed genuine concern for anyone but Ruth Hensley since 1871, she said. "What did you say to her?" "I told her I had decided my own place," Anna said. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good." She picked up her package from the counter. "Come on, the boys will be hungry by the time we get back." That should have been the end of it. In a better constructed world it would have been. But what? Anna didn't know what she had no way of knowing on that Thursday morning was that Ruth Hensley's husband, Gerald Hensley, was the county land agent, and that Gerald Hensley and Thomas Harding had been friends since before either of them had land worth agenting or ranches worth advertising for wives. And that Thomas Harding, who had walked out of the Callahan kitchen 2 weeks ago with his hat in his hand and a door closed behind him, had not stopped thinking about the woman who had closed it. She found out the way. She found out most important things at the ranch from Ethan directly, with no softening around the edges. He came in for supper on a Friday evening 4 weeks into her stay and sat down at the table without removing his hat, which meant he'd come directly from somewhere without stopping to decompress from the day the way he usually did. The boys were still washing up. Margaret was at the stove. Ethan sat down and looked at Anna with the expression that she had learned meant something difficult was coming. "I need to tell you something," he said. "All right," she said. "Gerald Hensley came by the ranch today," he said. "He came to see me about the north grazing lease, the county lease on the north pasture that I've been renewing every 3 years for the last 12. She waited. "He told me that the county is reviewing it," Ethan said. "He told me there are concerns about whether the ranch operation is." He used the word stable. "Stable," Anna said. "He said a ranch with an irregular domestic situation might not present well to the county board," Ethan said. He held her eyes steadily. His words. The kitchen was very quiet. Margaret had stopped moving at the stove. "He's using the lease," Anna said slowly. "He's threatening the lease because of me." "Because of Harding," Ethan said. "Harding is behind it. Gerald does what Tom Harding asks because Harding holds paper on 2 of Hensley's properties. So Harding can't get what he wants through a direct approach." Anna said, working through it. "So he goes through Hensley, and Hensley threatens your land." "That's how I read it," Ethan said. "The north lease," she said. "How important is it?" He didn't answer immediately, which was its own answer. "It's a third of our summer grazing," he said. "Without it, I'd have to reduce the herd significantly. It would take years to rebuild." Anna sat very still. Noah came running in from the hallway and stopped when he felt the air in the room. Children always felt the air in a room. "What's wrong?" he said immediately. "Nothing for you to worry about tonight," Margaret said smoothly, and redirected him to the wash basin with the practiced ease of a woman who had been managing difficult moments around children for 60 years. Samuel appeared behind his brother and did what Samuel did. Looked at each adult in the room in turn measuring. His eyes settled on Anna last and stayed there. She looked back at him steadily. She kept her face calm. He went to the wash basin. After supper, after the boys were in bed, after Margaret had excused herself with the particular diplomatic timing of a woman who understood when a conversation needed to happen without her in it, Anna sat across the table from Ethan and said what had been sitting in her chest all evening. "I should go," she said. He looked at her. "If my being here is costing you a third of your summer grazing—" "You're not costing me anything," he said. "Harding is. And Hensley. Don't take that on." "Ethan." "Anna." He said her name with a quietness that stopped her. "I have been managing this ranch for 12 years. I have dealt with difficult men and bad seasons and cattle losses and a grief that nearly took me under. I am not going to let Thomas Harding determine who lives in my house." "It's not about determination," she said. "It's about what's practical. Those boys need this ranch too. Those boys need the people in their lives to stop disappearing," he said. The directness of it, the rawness under the plainness of it, hit her somewhere she wasn't prepared for. He saw it. He looked down at the table for a moment, and when he looked back up, something in his face had shifted into a territory she hadn't seen him occupy before, less controlled, less measured. "Samuel stopped checking the window," he said. She went very still. "I noticed," he said. 3 days ago. He stopped checking the barn window every morning." He looked at her steadily. "Do you know how long he's been doing that?" "Margaret told me," she said quietly. 3 years, he said. "Every morning. Every single morning since his mother didn't come back." His jaw was tight. "He stopped 3 days ago, and the only thing that's changed is you." He paused. "So no, you're not leaving because Thomas Harding decided he'd rather make trouble than accept a no." Anna held his gaze and felt the ground shifting underneath her in a way that had nothing to do with the North grazing lease or Gerald Hensley or anything practical at all. "Ethan," she said carefully, "I need you to tell me what you're actually saying." He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm saying that what started as a practical arrangement," he said, "has become something I don't have a practical word for. And I'm saying I know that's not what you agreed to. And I'm saying I'm not asking you for anything you haven't chosen." He stopped, started again. "I'm saying that I think about you staying beyond the summer. I think about it more than I should probably. And I think you deserve to know that because you told me you needed things to stay clear, and I don't think they're entirely clear anymore. Not on my end." The kitchen was absolutely silent. Anna looked at this man across the table. This man who had picked up a stranger's suitcase at a boarding house porch and offered her honest work with no pressure and no obligation. Who told his boys the truth and kept the promises he made and shaved when he had time for it and didn't apologize when he didn't, and felt something she had been carefully not feeling for 4 weeks. Knock against the inside of her chest with the patience of something that was not going away. "I need to think," she said. "I know," he said. It's complicated. The boys are part of why I'm saying it," he said. "Not all of it, not most of it, but part of it." She stood up from the table. She needed to move. She needed 3 feet of kitchen between her and the particular quality of his attention, which was the same as it always was, direct, unhurried, without performance, and somehow that was exactly the problem. "Give me a few days," she said. "Take all the time you need," he said. She went to her room and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, and did not sleep for a very long time. What she was thinking about was not Ethan Callahan's steadiness, or Samuel's window checking, or Noah's 14 questions at breakfast, or Margaret's coffee on that first terrible morning. She was thinking about what it meant to choose something. Not to fall into it, not to be rescued into it, not to accept it because there was no alternative, but to actually choose it with full knowledge of what she was choosing and what it would cost and what it would require. She had chosen Daniel once, and that had been right. She had tried to choose Thomas Harding's advertisement, and that had been wrong, and she had survived it. This was different from both of those things. This was standing at the edge of something real, with both eyes open, knowing the ground was solid enough to hold her weight, and deciding whether to step forward or back. She was still deciding in the morning. She was still deciding 3 days later, when the second twist arrived. The one that was worse than Harding, worse than Hensley, worse than gossip or grazing leases, or any of the practical problems she'd been managing. It came in the form of a letter delivered to the ranch by the mail rider on a Tuesday afternoon. It was addressed to her. The return address was Springfield, Missouri. Her hand recognized the handwriting before her brain processed whose it was. Her husband Daniel's brother, James Whitmore. She had not been in contact with Daniel's family since the funeral. They had not approved of her particularly in the quiet, cold way of families who felt their son had married beneath his prospects. They had not been unkind exactly, but they had been clear about what they expected grief to look like, And Anna's version, which involved working and surviving, and eventually answering newspaper advertisements, had apparently not been it. She opened the letter at the kitchen table alone, Margaret having taken the boys to visit a neighboring farm. James Whitmore wrote in the same style he'd always used, formal and precise, as though the emotional distance were a point of professional pride. Dear Anna, I write on behalf of our family, with a matter of some urgency. We have recently been made aware of your circumstances in Montana, specifically your arrangement at the Callahan Ranch in Red Willow County. We are concerned that this arrangement reflects poorly on Daniel's memory and on the Whitmore name. We have consulted with our family's attorney, who advises that Daniel's estate, the terms of which were never formally settled, may contain provisions that would be relevant to your current situation. We would like to discuss this matter. We ask that you return to Missouri at your earliest convenience. She read it twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at it. Daniel's estate had been settled. She had settled it herself with the family's attorney in Springfield 14 months ago. There had been nothing complicated about it. Daniel had left very little, and what there was, the family had divided with efficient speed, leaving Anna with exactly what the law required, and nothing more. Terms that were never formally settled. That was not true. She knew it was not true. But a letter from an attorney was not the same thing as the truth, and she knew in the particular cold clarity of a woman who had been navigating difficult men in difficult situations for 2 years, exactly what this letter was. It was leverage, or the performance of leverage. Something that had been sent to make her feel unsafe enough to move. What she didn't know was how James Whitmore had learned she was in Red Willow, Montana. She thought about that for approximately 30 seconds before she arrived at the answer. Thomas Harding. She stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped back. Harding had found James Whitmore. Or Hensley had. Or someone in that chain of men who were accustomed to using systems and paperwork and legal language as weapons against people who couldn't fight back with the same tools. They had reached back into her past and pulled out the one thing that might actually make her feel like she had to leave. Not gossip, not pressure, not social disapproval, but the threat of a legal entanglement attached to her dead husband's name. She was furious. She was not afraid. She made that decision right then. She would be furious, but she would not be afraid, and she picked up the letter and walked out of the kitchen and across the yard to find Ethan. He was in the barn, which she knew because his horse was in the corral. She walked in and found him repairing a harness, and she held out the letter and waited while he read it. She watched his face while he read. The jaw. The stillness that came over him when he was controlling something. He lowered the letter. Harding, he said. It was not a question. That's what I think, she said. He went back that far, Ethan said. Something moved through his expression, not anger exactly, but something colder and more considered than anger. He found your husband's family. He's trying to make me feel like I have something to lose by staying, Anna said. He wants me to feel like leaving is the safer choice. Ethan looked at her steadily. Is it the safer choice? She looked right back at him. Safer for whom? He folded the letter and held it out to her. You should know, he said, that I have a lawyer in Billings, a good one. If there is any actual legal question about your husband's estate, it can be answered, and answered quickly. James Whitmore doesn't have a case, Anna said. The estate was settled. This is a performance. Performances can still cost time and money to counter, Ethan said. I know that, she said. So let me help, he said, simply, directly. The same way he'd said everything since the day he took off his hat in front of a boarding house porch. Not because you can't handle it, because you shouldn't have to handle it alone. She looked at this man in his barn, with harness leather in his hands, and the quiet certainty of someone who had decided something and meant it, and felt the ground shift again, that same fundamental shift that had been happening in increments for 4 weeks, and this time she did not step back from it. All right, she said. All right, he said. Yes, she said. Contact your lawyer in Billings. Let's answer this properly. He nodded once, then, because she needed to say it before she thought better of it. And Ethan, what you said the other night, about things not being entirely clear. He was very still. "They're not clear on my end either," she said. "I thought you should know that." I didn't say anything. He didn't need to. What happened in his face said it clearly enough, the careful unwinding of something that had been held tight for a long time, the particular quality of a man absorbing something he had wanted to hear and had not been certain he would. "Okay," he said quietly. "Okay," she said. She walked back across the yard to the house, and the afternoon sun was brutal on her shoulders, and her heart was going at a rate she chose not to examine too closely, and everything was still uncertain and complicated and nowhere near resolved. But she had said it, and he had heard it, and when she walked back into the kitchen and picked up James Whitmore's letter and folded it precisely in half and placed it in the kitchen drawer where she kept her own correspondence, she felt clearly, unambiguously, for the first time since she stepped off that train, that she was not managing a situation. She was living in one. That was different. That was the difference that mattered. Noah came home from the neighboring farm an hour later with a grass stain on both knees and a story about a rooster that had apparently declared war on him personally, and he told it at the kitchen table with the full dramatic investment of a child who understood that a good story deserved proper performance. And Samuel sat beside him, listening with that small, private, almost smile that he kept mostly to himself. And Margaret made tea. She didn't need, because it gave her hands something to do, while she laughed. And Ethan came in from the barn and sat at the table and caught Anna's eye across the kitchen with a look that said absolutely nothing and everything at the same time. Anna laughed at the rooster story. It was the first time she had laughed genuinely, fully, without reserve since before the train. Noah stopped mid-sentence and stared at her. "What?" she said. "You laughed," he said with the unfiltered observation of a child. "Like really laughed. I didn't know you could do that." "I've been practicing," she said. He grinned at her, that enormous, gap-toothed, completely unguarded grin, and went back to the rooster story with renewed enthusiasm. Samuel, who had been watching, looked at his hands, and then looked at Anna, and then looked at his hands again. Then very quietly, so quietly that only she could have heard it across the kitchen noise. "It sounds nice," he said. She looked at him. "What does, when you laugh," he said. "It sounds like it's supposed to be there." Anna Whitmore looked at this 6-year-old boy who checked windows and gave creekstones and carried 3 years of careful watching in his dark eyes, and felt something so large and so specific move through her chest that she had absolutely no word for it. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, steadily, carefully. He nodded once with great seriousness and went back to his milk. The evening settled over the Callahan ranch, the same way it always did, long and slow and red. The heat releasing inch by inch as the light changed, the cattle sounds coming in from the pasture, the familiar kitchen noises of a household ending its day. Anna washed the supper dishes, and Margaret dried them, and the boys argued about something in the next room with the companionable intensity of brothers who would forget it by morning, and Ethan sat on the porch in the last of the light, doing the quiet thinking that was his version of rest. Everything was still complicated. James Whitmore's letter was still in the kitchen drawer. Gerald Hensley still had a hand on the North grazing lease. Thomas Harding was still somewhere in this county with a grievance and the willingness to use other people to satisfy it. None of that had changed, but Anna stood at the kitchen sink with her hands in the warm water and the sounds of this household all around her, and knew with the same bone-deep certainty with which she had known other true things in her life that she was not going to let any of it take this from her. Whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, she was going to fight for it. She just had to figure out how. Ethan's lawyer in Billings sent his reply within the week. His name was Robert Carr, and Ethan had been using him for land matters since the early days of the ranch. The letter was short and precise, and delivered exactly what Anna had already known, but needed confirmed in writing. Daniel Whitmore's estate had been legally and fully settled in Springfield, Missouri, 14 months prior. James Whitmore had no standing to reopen it. Any attorney advising otherwise was either incompetent or operating in bad faith. Anna read the letter twice at the kitchen table, folded it, and put it in the drawer on top of James Whitmore's letter. "Well," Margaret said from across the table. "Well," Anna agreed. "So that's finished." "The legal part of it is," Anna said. Whether James Whitmore accepts that is a different question. What are you going to do? Anna looked at the drawer for a moment. I'm going to write him a letter, she said. Clear, direct, and with a copy of Mr. Carr's finding enclosed. And I'm going to make very sure he understands that if this continues, I will not be handling it quietly. Good, Margaret said. She wrote the letter that afternoon. She wrote it once through to get the anger out of her system. Then she set that version aside and wrote it again, measured, factual, final. She enclosed Carr's summary. She sealed it herself and gave it to the mail rider the next morning. That should have been the end of James Whitmore. It very nearly was. What it was not the end of was Thomas Harding. He came to the ranch again on a Thursday, and this time he did not come alone. Anna was with Noah at the kitchen table, working through his reading lesson. Noah could decode words reasonably well, but lost patience with long passages and needed someone to sit with him through the frustration of it when she heard horses in the yard. 2 sets of hooves. She glanced out and saw Harding's gray, and beside it, a horse she didn't recognize, ridden by a man she had never seen. Noah looked up. Who's that? Stay here, she said. She went to the front porch and stood there, not going down the steps, waiting. Harding dismounted with the ease of a man who had done this particular kind of call, before the kind where he showed up with numbers on his side and let that do the preliminary work. The man beside him was older, perhaps 60, wearing the kind of coat that meant either money or the ambition of money. Miss Whitmore, Harding said, touching his hat. Mr. Harding, she said. Mr. Callahan isn't here. I know, he said. I came to see you. She waited. This is Arthur Briggs, Harding said, indicating the older man. He's a property attorney out of Helena. Something cold moved through Anna's stomach, but she kept her face entirely still. Is he? She said. I asked him to look into something, Harding said. It concerns the terms under which you're employed at this ranch. The terms under which I'm employed, Anna repeated slowly, are between me and Ethan Callahan. They are not your business, Mr. Harding. They may become the county's business, the attorney said. He had a careful, practiced voice, the voice of someone who used legal language the way other men used fists. There are questions about the nature of the arrangement. A single woman, not a relation, living in a household with a widowed man and 2 minor children, without formal documentation of employment. I have formal documentation, Anna said. Both men looked at her. She had documentation because Ethan had insisted on it, 3 weeks in a written agreement. Wages, specified duties outlined, signed by both of them with Margaret as witness. She had thought it was unnecessary at the time. She understood now that Ethan had been thinking further ahead than she had. Ethan Callahan drew up a formal employment agreement, she said. Witnessed and dated. If the county has questions about the arrangement, they are welcome to examine it. A pause. Harding looked at the attorney. I wasn't aware of a written agreement, Briggs said carefully. I imagine not, Anna said. Harding looked back at her. The easy confidence had shifted into something harder underneath. Anna, he said. He had not used her given name before. It was deliberate, a reminder of the months of correspondence, of the intimacy of letters, of the fact that he believed he had some claim on her through all those words they had exchanged. I am trying to help you. This situation you've put yourself in. I put myself in nothing, she said. You put me on that platform. I found my own way from there. You found your way into a household where people are talking. People are always talking, she said. I have stopped governing my life by what people are talking about. I recommend it. His jaw tightened. The county lease on the north pasture is between the county and Ethan Callahan, she said. And I believe Mr. Callahan has already responded to any concerns the county has raised through Mr. Hensley. She looked at him steadily. Which I also believe you already know, because Ethan had responded. He had gone to Billings himself, not just sent a letter, and he had met with the county land board directly and brought documentation of 12 years of responsible ranch management and a character reference from 3 neighboring ranchers who'd known him since before the twins were born. The board had confirmed the lease renewal. Hensley had delivered the news to Ethan with the stiff discomfort of a man who had been used as a pawn and was embarrassed about it. Harding knew all of this. He had known it before he rode out here this morning, which meant this visit was not about the lease or the attorney or any practical matter. This visit was about something else entirely. Tom, Anna said, and she used his given name deliberately, the same way he had used hers to be perfectly clear about what she was doing. What do you actually want? The question landed. She watched it land. Howe was quiet for a long moment. The attorney, reading the room with professional accuracy, found something interesting to look at on the far side of the yard. I made a mistake, Harding said. I know I made a mistake. I've known it since the day I sent that letter, but by the time I understood it... It was too late, she said. You were already here, he said. Yes, she said. I was already here, because here was where I had to go when you closed the door you'd invited me through. She looked at him. Not with anger. She was past anger with him. She had burned through it weeks ago, but with something clear and final. You cannot make a mistake of that size and then arrive on someone else's porch with an attorney and expect to fix it. That is not how mistakes of that size work. He looked at her for a long time. You care about him, he said. Callahan. She said nothing. I can see it, he said. You didn't come out here to tell me about the employment agreement. You came out here because you're protecting this place. That's not the face of a woman working a temporary arrangement. Mr. Harding, she said, please leave. He held her gaze for one more beat. Then he put his hat on, turned his horse, and rode out of the yard without looking back. The attorney followed with considerably less dignity. Anna stood on the porch until the sound of hooves faded completely. Then her knees, which had been entirely steady throughout, informed her. They were going to need a moment, and she sat down on the porch steps and pressed both hands flat on the wood and breathed. She was still sitting there when she heard the wagon coming up the road. Ethan back from the south pasture earlier than expected. He pulled the wagon into the yard and took one look at her face and was off the seat before the horses had fully stopped. What happened? He said. Harding came, she said, with an attorney from Helena. He was very still. What did they want? I'm not entirely sure, she said honestly. I think he wanted to see whether he could still move me, whether the right combination of legal language and personal appeal would... She stopped. He's not going to try again. I think he understood something today. What did you say to him? The truth, she said. Which is what I always say, and it seems to work eventually. Ethan stood in front of her and looked at her with the full, undivided weight of his attention that she had learned was his version of reaching for someone's hand. Are you all right? He said. I'm fine, she said. Yes, I'm fine. And she realized saying it, not performing it. Actually fine in the way that meant she had stood on a porch in front of a difficult man with documents and social pressure and history between them, and she had not moved 1 inch. I told him the lease was settled, and we had a formal employment agreement, and he should leave. He left. He did. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The employment agreement, he said. I'm glad you drew it up, she said. I drew it up, he said carefully, because I wanted to protect you, practically, in case anyone questioned the arrangement. I know, she said. And because... He stopped. Ethan. Because I wanted something on paper that said you belonged here, he said. Even if it was just a work agreement. Even if it was just wages and duties. I wanted your name on a piece of paper that said you were part of this household. He looked at her with that quality she'd come to recognize as his version of being completely unguarded. That probably wasn't just practical. She looked up at him from the porch steps. No, she said quietly. It probably wasn't. He sat down on the steps beside her, not touching a foot of space between them, and they sat in the afternoon quiet, the way they sometimes sat on the porch in the evenings, in the particular comfortable silence of two people who had stopped needing to fill it. Noah finished his reading passage this morning, she said after a while. He looked at her sideways. The whole passage, the whole thing, without stopping to complain once. That might be a first, he said. He did complain afterward, she said. But during was perfect. A sound from inside. Margaret's voice. The boys responding. Ordinary household noise that said everything was fine, and Ethan turned his head slightly toward it, the way he did sometimes, like a man checking that the things he loved were still in place. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said the other night, that things aren't clear on your end either." "I remember what I said," she said. "I don't want to push," he said. "You're not pushing," she said. "I just—" He stopped, started again in the careful way he had when something mattered too much to approximate. "I've been thinking about what this looks like, going forward. And I want to be honest with you about what I'm thinking, because you've always been honest with me, and you deserve the same." She waited. "I'm thinking about asking you to stay," he said. Not through the employment agreement. Something different. Something that would mean you have a real place here. A permanent place. He looked at her steadily. "But I'm also thinking that you came here having already had one man offer you a permanent place and then take it back, and I want you to know that I understand if that makes the offer harder to hear. From anyone, including me." Anna sat with that for a moment. "It does make it harder to hear," she said honestly. "That's true." He nodded. "But," she said, "the reason it's harder to hear is not because I don't believe you mean it. It's because I know what it costs to believe something like this and be wrong. And I'm—" She paused, finding the precise word. "I'm cautious. I've become very cautious." "That's reasonable," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. Something shifted in his face. "I'm saying I need a little more time," she said. "Not because I'm undecided about you, about this." She looked at him directly because he deserved directness. "I'm decided about you. I think I've been decided for a while. But I want to make the choice clearly with both eyes open, not because I'm standing on the edge of a difficult situation and you're the solid ground nearby. I don't want to choose you because you're safe. I want to choose you because you're you." Howe was quiet for a long moment. "I reckon," he said slowly, "that is the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me." "I've been practicing," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but adjacent. They sat on the porch steps in the afternoon light and didn't say anything else for a while, and it was exactly right. The crisis, when it came, did not announce itself. It never did. It was Samuel who found it. 4 days after Harding's last visit, early in the morning, before anyone else was fully awake. Samuel came to Anna's room and knocked. She was already dressed, old habit, and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway in his nightshirt, with his dark eyes wide and his face carrying the particular expression of a child who had encountered something too large for him to process alone. "Samuel," she said immediately. "What's wrong?" "Grandma's in the kitchen," he said. "She was making tea. She sat down and she's not. She said she's fine, but she's holding her arm and she looks—" He stopped. "She looked like when Ma—" He couldn't finish it. Anna was already moving past him down the hall. Margaret was at the kitchen table, upright, one hand pressed to her left arm and the other flat on the table, and her face had the particular grayish cast of someone working very hard at something internal. She looked up when Anna came in and said, "It's nothing, I just—" "Don't," Anna said. She crossed to her immediately and crouched in front of her chair. "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe a little more." "Your arm, your chest." "Both," Margaret admitted. "But it's not—" "Ethan," Anna called. She didn't raise her voice above what the house needed, but she made it carry. She heard him on the stairs immediately. He was a light sleeper. Always had been with young children in the house, and he appeared in the kitchen doorway. In 30 seconds, still pulling his shirt straight, and read the situation faster than Anna had. "How bad?" he said to his mother. "I'm all right," Margaret said. "Mama, it started about 20 minutes ago. My arm, my chest. I didn't want to—" Ethan was already at the door. "I'm getting Doc Reeves." "Ethan, it's 5 in the morning. Doc Reeves has been awake at 5 in the morning before," Ethan said, and he was gone. Anna stayed with Margaret. She pulled a chair close and took Margaret's free hand in both of hers, not pressing, not gripping, just holding, just the weight of another person's warmth, and said, "Keep talking to me." "I'm fine," Margaret said, but she didn't pull her hand away. "Tell me something," Anna said. "Tell me about when Ethan was small, something he'd be embarrassed about." Margaret looked at her, a tiny sound that was not quite a laugh. "He was terrified of the barn cats," she said, "until he was 9 years old. The orange one we had then. Biscuit Ethan would go all the way around the barn to avoid crossing the yard where Biscuit was." "He never told me that," Anna said. "He would deny it now," Margaret said. Her color was not good, but she was talking, which was what mattered. "He also cried at the end of every book his father read to him. Every single one. His father thought it was wonderful. Ethan was mortified." "He reads to the boys," Anna said. "Every night." Margaret looked at her. "Yes," she said quietly. "He does." Samuel appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his nightshirt, and Anna looked at him steadily. "Come sit with your grandma," she said. "She needs company." He crossed the kitchen immediately and sat in the chair on Margaret's other side, and Margaret put her arm around his shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for 6 years, and something in Margaret's face eased slightly at the contact. "I'm right here," Samuel told her. Very seriously. "I know, baby," Margaret said. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. Anna looked at this 6-year-old boy who had learned about people disappearing before he had words for it, who had spent 3 years watching windows and checking kitchens, and who was now sitting absolutely still beside his grandmother, with the complete stillness of someone who understood that staying was the most important thing you could do, and something cracked open in the middle of her chest that she couldn't close again. Doc Reeves arrived with Ethan 40 minutes later, and he was everything a frontier doctor needed to be: fast, practical, no wasted motion. He examined Margaret at the kitchen table with Anna and Ethan both present, because Margaret refused to be moved to another room, and she refused with enough firmness that the doctor accepted it. His assessment was careful. He did not use words like dangerous or serious, but he also did not use words like nothing or fine. He talked about the heart working harder than it should. He talked about rest, complete rest, actual rest, not Margaret Callahan's version of rest, which everyone in the room knew involved getting up before anyone else and doing 3 hours of work before breakfast. He talked about diet and heat and the importance of not pushing. "You've been carrying too much," he said to Margaret directly, "for too long." "I have what needs carrying," Margaret said. "You have people who can carry it," Doc Reeves said, and he looked at Anna when he said it. Margaret looked at Anna too. Anna held both their gazes. "She won't have to manage any of it," Anna said. "I'll take care of the household, the boys, the cooking, the mending, everything. She rests." "Anna," Margaret started. "Margaret," Anna said, not unkindly, completely firmly. "You sat across from me on my first morning here and told me there was a difference between working hard and working scared. I'm telling you now that there's a difference between resting and giving up, and you are going to learn that difference immediately." Margaret looked at her for a long beat. "She's right," Ethan said quietly from beside the door. "You're both against me," Margaret said. "We're both for you," Anna corrected. "There's a difference." Something in Margaret's expression changed the old woman who had watched everything and assessed everything and handed out trust sparingly because she'd learned that it was worth too much to waste, and she looked at Anna with a quality Anna had not seen directed at her before, something that wasn't assessment anymore. "All right," Margaret said quietly. "All right." Doc Reeves left instructions and departed, promising to return in 2 days. Ethan settled his mother in her room with the particular gentle efficiency of a son who had been worried about this woman for longer than he'd admitted, and Anna took the boys to the kitchen and made breakfast with Noah, chattering at her elbow, and Samuel sitting close and quiet, his usual watching supplemented today by something that was almost certainly the 6-year-old version of needing to be reassured that the important people were still intact. She put his breakfast in front of him, and without making anything of it, rested her hand briefly on his shoulder as she passed. He put his hand over hers, just for a second. Then he let go and picked up his fork. She kept moving. She didn't let herself stop and feel it until she was at the stove with her back to the table, and then she let herself feel it for exactly 5 seconds before she went back to the eggs. 5 seconds was enough. It was Ethan who came to find her when the boys were outside, and Margaret was resting, and the house had the particular midday quiet of a place that had absorbed something hard and was steadying itself. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her for a moment before he spoke. "You said you needed time," he said. She turned from the counter. "I did." "Have you had enough of it?" She looked at him. This man who had gone for the doctor at 5 in the morning and sat beside his mother's chair and told his sons the truth and driven a woman he'd never met away from a boarding house porch because he recognized a person who needed solid ground, and she thought about cautious. She thought about clear-eyed. She thought about what it meant to choose something because it was real rather than because it was safe. "Yes," she said. He crossed the kitchen. He stopped 2 feet from her, the careful, respectful distance he always kept, the distance of a man who understood that respect was demonstrated in the body, not just the words, and looked at her steadily. "Then I'm asking," he said, "properly. I'm asking you to stay. Not through a work agreement. Not temporarily. I'm asking you to be—" He stopped, started again. "I'm asking if you'd be willing to build this with me. The ranch, the boys, this whatever this is becoming." "It's becoming a family," she said quietly. "Yes," he said. "It is." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the platform. She thought about the She thought about boarding house doors and empty key racks, and the first night in this kitchen, and Samuel's creekstone, and Noah's reading passage, and Margaret's coffee, and Ethan's hat, and 100 mornings of showing up. "I came here to build a life," she said. "That's what I told you in those first letters before everything went sideways. I came because I wanted to build something real." "I know," he said. "This is real," she said. "You're real. Those boys are real." She held his gaze. "Yes, yes. My answer is yes." He reached out and took her hand slowly, the way he did everything without hurry, without performance, with the complete intention of someone who meant exactly what they were doing. His hand was warm and rough and steady. She held on. Outside, Noah's voice came carrying across the yard, something about the rooster from the neighboring farm having apparently followed them home, which Anna was fairly certain was not possible, but with Noah Callahan, you never entirely ruled anything out, and Samuel's quieter voice responding with the particular tone he used when he was trying not to laugh, and the ordinary afternoon sounds of the ranch going on around them, and the kitchen smelled like coffee and dried herbs, and the particular settled scent of a place that had been a home for a long time and intended to go on being one. Anna Whitmore stood in it with Ethan Callahan's hand in hers, and felt something she did not have a word adequate to. She had been trying to build a life. She had not known she was building this one, but she was. She was building it right here with these particular people on this particular ground in this place she had arrived at by accident and stayed at by choice. And the difference between those two things, the arriving and the staying, was the difference between a story about loss and a story about what came after loss. And she was living in the second kind of story, now the better kind, the kind that was still being written. She held on. Outside, Noah announced that the rooster was definitely on the porch. "That is absolutely not possible," Ethan said, not letting go of her hand. "With your son." Anna said, "I've learned to assume anything is possible." He laughed. A real laugh, low and surprised and entirely unguarded, the kind she hadn't heard from him before, and it was exactly what it was supposed to sound like. She held on. The rooster was in fact on the porch. Noah had not exaggerated even slightly, which was unusual enough that everyone came to look. It was the big red one from the Delaney farm, 2 miles east, standing on the top porch step, with the absolute authority of a bird that had decided this was its territory now, and was prepared to defend that position. Ethan stood in the doorway and looked at it. "How?" he said. "I don't know," Noah said, delighted. "But he followed us the whole way back. I didn't encourage him. Samuel, tell Pa I didn't encourage him." "He didn't encourage him," Samuel said with the careful accuracy of a child who understood the difference between the full truth and a useful portion of it. "Samuel," Anna said. Samuel looked at her. "He only encouraged him a little," he amended. Ethan looked at the rooster. The rooster looked at Ethan with the complete moral confidence of an animal that had never once questioned its own decisions. Ethan looked back at Anna, and she saw it again, that low, unguarded laugh just behind his eyes. The one she had only recently learned existed, and she pressed her lips together to keep her own face straight. "We are returning that bird to Frank Delaney in the morning," Ethan said. "Can he stay tonight?" Noah said. "Just tonight he could sleep in the barn." "Roosters do not sleep in barns on this ranch." "He could sleep on the porch." "He is not sleeping on the porch." "He's already on the porch," Samuel observed with perfect factual accuracy. Anna went inside before she laughed out loud, because someone in this household needed to maintain some dignity, and it was clearly not going to be any of the Callahan men. That evening, with Margaret resting, and the boys finally in bed, and the rooster having been persuaded off the porch and into a temporary enclosure in the yard that Noah had constructed with more enthusiasm than engineering skill, Anna and Ethan sat on the porch steps in the dark, the way they had started, sitting there side by side, close enough that the space between them was a choice and not a distance. "I need to tell you something," Anna said. "All right," he said. "When I wrote those letters to Thomas Harding," she said, "I was honest. Everything I wrote was true, but I was writing toward something I needed, a shape I had decided my future was supposed to have. And I think I was so focused on that shape that I didn't see clearly enough whether he actually fit it." Ethan was quiet, listening. "What I'm saying," she said, "is that I came here with a plan, and the plan failed, and out of that failure I found something I wouldn't have known to plan for." She looked at him. "You, those boys, Margaret, this place. None of this was in my plan." "Is that a problem?" he said carefully. "No," she said. "That's what I'm telling you. It's the opposite of a problem. It's the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years, and I needed you to know that I'm not here because things didn't work out. I'm here because this is where I want to be." He was quiet for a moment. "Anna," he said. "Ethan, I have been on this ranch for 12 years, he said. "I have had good years and bad ones. I have had seasons where I didn't know if we'd make it through, and seasons where everything worked the way it was supposed to. I've loved this land my whole life." He paused. "But I have not looked forward to coming inside at the end of a day the way I have looked forward to it since you've been here. And I didn't know I was missing that. I didn't know I had stopped looking forward to it." She held that. "Then we're agreed," she said. "We're agreed," he said. They sat in the dark for a long time after that, not needing to say anything else. What came next arrived the way the most significant things always arrived, not as a single moment, but as a series of small ones that accumulated into something permanent. Margaret recovered. Not quickly, and not without argument. She was constitutionally incapable of resting without resistance. But she recovered, and each day, Anna held the line that Doc Reeves had drawn firmly and without apology, until Margaret stopped fighting it and started very quietly accepting being cared for. It was not easy for her. Anna could see that. Margaret Callahan had been the person doing the caring for 64 years. Receiving it required a different kind of courage. "You're bossy," Margaret told her on the 5th day of enforced rest. "I learned from someone," Anna said pleasantly, handing her a cup of tea. Margaret looked at the tea, looked at Anna. "I suppose I deserve that," she said. "You deserve rest," Anna said. "Which is what you're going to get." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "Ethan told me what you said to him. On the porch." Anna looked at her. Margaret looked at her for a long moment with those direct, assessing eyes that had looked at Anna across a porch railing on the very first day, and found her worth letting inside. "Good," Margaret said quietly. "Then we understand each other." They did. They had for a while now. The twist that no one saw coming arrived on a Saturday morning 3 weeks after Margaret's episode, in the form of a wagon coming up the ranch road that Anna didn't recognize. She was in the yard with the boys. Noah had talked her into examining the progress of the creek fish situation, which had resulted in no fish but considerable enthusiasm and wet boots when she saw it coming. 2 people on the wagon bench. A man driving a woman beside him, both of them older. She didn't know them, but something in the way. The woman was sitting upright, hands folded with the braced posture of someone who had been building toward a difficult thing for a long time, made Anna's chest tighten before she knew why. Ethan came around from the barn and stopped when he saw the wagon. He knew them. She could tell by the way his body changed, not tensing exactly, but settling into a particular careful stillness. "Who is it?" she asked quietly when he reached her. "Jim and Evelyn Marsh," he said. "Clara's parents. The twins' maternal grandparents." Anna looked at the wagon, at the woman descending from it with the careful movements of someone in her late 60s turning to scan the yard and finding the boys immediately, her eyes going straight to Noah and Samuel, the way eyes always went straight to people they loved before they'd registered anything else. Noah looked at the wagon, looked at Ethan. "Is that—" "Yes," Ethan said. "Go say hello." Noah ran. That was simply what Noah did. He ran toward all things, with complete commitment. Samuel stood beside Anna for a moment, and she felt him looking at her sideways, with that measuring quality. "It's all right," she said quietly. "Go on." He went, more slowly than his brother, but he went. Anna watched Evelyn Marsh, a small woman. Clara's build, probably with gray hair, and the kind of face that had cried a great deal and found its way through to something steadier on the other side, crouched down. When Samuel reached her and put both hands on the boy's face, the way grandmothers held the faces of grandchildren they hadn't seen in too long, she heard Samuel say very clearly across the yard, "Grandma Evelyn, are you staying?" She didn't hear the answer. Jim Marsh shook Ethan's hand with the solemnity of two men who had a complicated history and had chosen to stand on the same side of it anyway. He was tall, spare, with the weathered economy of a man who had worked land his whole life. "Ethan," he said. "Jim," Ethan said. "It's good to see you." "We should have come sooner," Jim said. "We know that." "You're here now," Ethan said. Jim looked at Anna. Not unkindly. Directly the way people looked at you when they were trying to understand something quickly because they needed to. "This is Anna Whitmore," Ethan said. "She's been with us since July." Jim Marsh looked at her for a moment that contained a great deal of quiet evaluation. "The boys seem well," he said finally. "They are," Anna said. "They look—" He stopped. Something crossed his face. "They look like themselves again. We'd been worried." "They're remarkable boys," Anna said. "Both of them." Jim looked at her for one more beat, then nodded once, the nod of a man who had made a decision and intended to stand by it. "I'm glad you're here," he said simply. It was Anna understood the most important sentence Jim Marsh had said to her, and possibly would ever say to her, and it was enough. The Marshes stayed for 2 days. They slept in the spare room, and meals were crowded and loud, and Evelyn cried twice that Anna saw once when Samuel climbed into her lap after supper without being asked, and once when she found the boys' room and saw the worn stuffed bear still on Samuel's bed, the one that had belonged to Clara. Anna gave them space. She kept the household running, kept meals on the table, kept Noah from overwhelming his grandmother with questions at a rate that would have exhausted a younger woman. She was present but not intrusive, visible but not centered. She understood instinctively that this visit was not about her and should not become about her. It was Evelyn who came to find her on the second evening when the men were on the porch and the boys were in bed. She sat at the kitchen table across from Anna and folded her hands and looked at her with the direct, clear-eyed quality of a woman who had been through enough not to waste time on indirection. "I loved my daughter," Evelyn said. "No," Anna said. She was extraordinary. She loved Ethan and those boys with everything she had." She was quiet for a moment. "And she's been gone 3 years, and we have grieved every one of those years. Jim and I both." "Of course," Anna said. "But grief is not the same as wanting things to stay stopped," Evelyn said. "I want you to know that. What I see when I look at this house now—" She stopped, steadied. "What I see is those boys laughing. What I see is Ethan coming inside at the end of the day and being glad to come inside. What I see is Margaret resting." She looked at Anna steadily. "I have been hoping for all of those things for 3 years. I never expected them to arrive in the form of a woman who answered the wrong man's advertisement." Anna felt the back of her throat tighten. "Clara would have liked you," Evelyn said. "I'm certain of it. She would have said you have good hands. She always judged people by their hands, whether they used them to build things or to hold things. She would have seen you and said she has good hands. Anna could not speak for a moment. "Thank you," she said when she could. Evelyn reached across the table and squeezed her hand once firmly, then let go and stood up and went to bed. Anna sat at the kitchen table in the quiet for a long time after that. She has good hands. She looked at her hands on the table. The hands that had torn a letter into pieces on a railway platform. The hands that had found their way around a stranger's kitchen before anyone was awake. The hands that had taken Samuel's creek stone from across a table and placed it where he could see she valued it. The hands that had held Margaret's through a frightening morning. The hands that Ethan Callahan had reached for on a porch step in the middle of an ordinary afternoon and held like they were something worth holding. She pressed her palms flat on the table. She was still there. The morning the Marshes left, Samuel did something that nobody expected. He had been quiet throughout breakfast, quieter than usual, which was saying something, and when the wagon was loaded and the goodbyes were happening in the yard, and Evelyn had hugged both boys with the fervent precision of a woman storing something up for the long drive home. Samuel pulled away from his grandmother's embrace, walked across the yard and took Anna's hand. Just took it, slipped his small hand into hers, and held on. Everyone saw it. Evelyn Marsh pressed her fingers to her mouth. Jim looked at his boots. Noah stared with open curiosity. Ethan, standing by the wagon, looked at his son, and then at Anna, and then at his son again, and something in his face was so open and unguarded that Anna had to look away. She held Samuel's hand. "You gonna be okay?" she asked him quietly. "Yes," he said. He was watching the wagon. "They'll come back." "They will," she said. "And you'll be here when they do," he said. It was not a question. She understood that. It was a statement of fact that he had decided on and was putting into the world, because saying things out loud made them more real, and Samuel Callahan had learned early that you held tight to the things that were real. "Yes," she said. "I'll be here." He nodded once with the gravity of a 6-year-old who had just confirmed something important and went back to waving at his grandparents as the wagon rolled down the road. Anna stood in the yard and watched the wagon until it turned at the end of the road, and then she looked at the ranch around her. The barn, the house, the garden, fighting the late summer heat, the cattle in the distance, the wide Montana sky doing what it always did, which was absolutely everything, and she breathed in and out and felt the solidity of the ground under her feet. She had arrived here with nothing but a suitcase and a refusal to disappear quietly. She had built something. Not finished, nothing real was ever finished, but built. Solid. True. There was one final thing left to happen, and it happened on the last Sunday of August, which was already threatening to become September, the air carrying the first distant suggestion of a Montana autumn. Ethan asked her to ride out with him to the north pasture in the morning before the boys were up. Margaret was well enough now to manage breakfast. She had insisted with the particular stubbornness of a woman who had been resting under protest for weeks and was done with it, and Anna had agreed because arguing with Margaret Callahan about whether she could make her own biscuits was a battle that existed only to be lost. They rode out in the early light without talking much, which was their way, which she had come to love as much as anything about him. The fact that silence between them was never empty. He stopped at the north fence line where the grazing land stretched out in all directions, and she stopped beside him. He reached into his coat pocket and took out something small and held it out to her. It was a ring. Simple gold with a small stone that caught the morning light and held it. She looked at it. "It was my grandmother's," he said. "My mother's mother. She wore it for 52 years. He paused. "Mama gave it to me this morning, before we left. She said—" He stopped, and she could hear something in his voice that was carefully managed. "She said she'd been waiting to give it to the right person." Anna looked at the ring in his palm. She thought about Margaret, 64 years old, and finally resting, who had watched Anna from a porch railing and decided she was worth letting inside. Who had told her she had good hands without knowing that was already someone else's verdict. "Anna Whitmore," Ethan said. "I am not a man of many words. You know that." "I do," she said. "But I want to say this right. he said. You came to Red Willow on the worst day of your life, and you stayed. Not because you had to, not because there was nowhere else to go, because you chose to. He held her gaze with the full, direct, unhurried weight of a man who meant every syllable. I am asking you to keep choosing this. To choose me and those boys and this land, and whatever comes next, the hard seasons and the good ones, and all the ordinary days in between. I'm asking you to build this with me. For real. Permanent. All of it. She looked at him on that horse in that morning light. This man who had taken his hat off in front of a boarding house porch and treated her like a person before she'd had a chance to prove she was one, and she did not hesitate. Yes, she said. Ethan, yes. He put the ring on her finger. His hands were steady, so were hers. They rode back to the ranch without hurry. And when they came into the yard, Noah came off the porch at a dead run, the way he always did, and pulled up short when he saw their faces, and performed the instantaneous emotional calculus of a 7-year-old who had grown up watching adults carefully. Something happened, he said. Something happened. Ethan agreed. Good or bad? The best, Anna said. Noah looked at her hand. At the ring. At his father. At the ring again. His face went through approximately 11 distinct expressions in 4 seconds. Are you going to be our... He stopped. He looked at Anna directly with those enormous dark eyes, and for once in his life, he chose his words before he said them, which told her everything about how much this mattered to him. Are you going to stay? He said. For always. For always, she said. Noah made a sound that was pure joy, completely unfiltered, and launched himself off the bottom porch step at Anna, and she caught him because she had learned to anticipate Noah Callahan's more enthusiastic moments, and he wrapped both arms around her neck and held on with the complete commitment of a child who had been waiting for something without knowing what it was and had just found it. Samuel appeared in the doorway. He looked at his brother. He looked at his father. He looked at Anna, who was still holding Noah with one arm and probably would be for some time. He came down the porch steps. He stood in front of her and looked at the ring and then at her face. You said for always, he said. I did, she said. He considered this for a long, serious moment. Then he stepped forward and leaned against her side. Not a dramatic gesture, not a performance, just a small boy, putting himself next to the person he had decided was safe, and she put her free arm around him and held both of them, this loud one and this quiet one. These two boys who had been praying for something patient to walk through their door. And she held them and felt Ethan's hand on her shoulder and heard Margaret's voice from inside the house asking what all the commotion was, and thought clearly finally, without reservation, this is it. This is the thing. Not the plan she had crossed 400 miles carrying. Not the shape she had imagined her future would take. Something better than imagined. Something real. Margaret appeared in the doorway and took one look at the scene in the yard and looked at Ethan and said, Well, it's about time. Mama, Ethan said. Don't mama me. I gave you that ring 6 weeks ago. I needed to be sure of the timing. The timing, Margaret said, with the magnificent dryness of a woman who had been patient about this for considerably longer than 6 weeks. She came down the porch steps and cupped Anna's face in both her worn, strong hands and looked at her with those direct eyes, and what was in them was not assessment anymore, had not been assessment for a long time. Welcome home, Margaret said. Anna held those 2 words in her chest and felt them settle into the exact shape of the space that had been waiting for them. Not welcome to the ranch. Not welcome to the arrangement, or welcome to the household, or any of the careful, temporary provisional words that had surrounded her arrival and her first weeks here. Welcome home. She had come to Red Willow, Montana on the worst day of her life, with a torn letter and a returned banknote and a suitcase, and the plain refusal to disappear. She had sat on a boarding house porch and been found by a man who recognized a person who needed solid ground and offered her some without conditions. She had cooked biscuits before dawn and held a frightened old woman's hand and listened to a quiet boy's long watching and laughed at roosters on porches and written letters that needed writing and said hard things that needed saying and stayed every morning, simply stayed, because staying was what she had decided to do. She had not found what she came looking for. She had found something that could not be advertised in any newspaper, could not be described in any letter, could not be planned for, or anticipated, or arranged in advance. Something that only came to people who were willing to stand on a platform with pieces of a torn letter blowing away in the wind and choose in that exact moment of having lost everything not to disappear. Some doors closed because